In the long annals of armed conflict, certain engagements unfold under winter conditions so extreme that nature itself becomes an additional, often deadlier enemy. Among the harshest environments encountered by militaries are those blanketed with snow and marked by frigid temperatures plunging below zero. Forces not only must contend with enemy fire, but also catastrophic cold-related injuries, frozen supply lines, and paralyzing blizzards. Across different eras and regions, such contests have illustrated how inadequate preparation, poor equipment, and unfamiliarity with winter terrain can devastate armies. The most unforgiving struggles often left thousands suffering from frostbite, hypothermia, or starvation before direct combat determined any outcome. These events, each differing in scale and time period, highlight a recurring truth. When warfare collides with severe snow and ice, human endurance faces its ultimate test. Battle of Tolvajärvi. In December 1939, the Battle of Tolvajärvi emerged early in the Winter War, with Finnish defenders facing invading Soviet forces. Temperatures dropped below 20 degrees Celsius, and dense forests filled with snow slowed movements, complicated resupply, and tested troop endurance. Although fighting was intense, weather-induced casualties remained relatively low, in part because Finnish units were adept at skiing through deep drifts and adapting to brutal cold. Soviet soldiers, burdened by unfamiliar conditions and inadequate winter gear, suffered frostbite and morale issues, yet not on a massive scale. The Finnish victory demonstrated how familiarity with harsh climates could minimize non-combat losses despite severe weather. While fatalities occurred, the extreme conditions mainly hindered mobility rather than cause widespread casualties. This engagement set a precedent for leveraging winter tactics effectively in future harsh Arctic conflicts. Battle of Rajat Road. In early January 1940, the Battle of Rajat Road tested Finnish ingenuity against Soviet forces amid heavy snowfall and sub-zero cold. Dense forests and snowdrifts choked the narrow route, halting Soviet columns and stranding underprepared troops. Although casualties from frostbite and exposure rose higher than at Tolvajärvi, they remained contained because Finnish units skillfully exploited their winter advantages. Soviet soldiers, short on warm clothing and proper shelters, struggled with icy conditions that froze rifles, immobilized vehicles, and triggered panic. Finnish ski patrols orchestrated devastating ambushes, using speed, camouflage, and familiarity with Arctic terrain to minimize their own non-combat losses. While frostbite and hypothermia claimed some Finnish lives, the Soviets suffered far worse. This engagement illustrated how adapting to snowbound battlefields could tilt the balance, inflicting disproportionate misery on ill-prepared attackers. Battle of Suomussalmi. Between December 1939 and early January 1940, the Battle of Suomussalmi showcased Finland's adept handling of severe winter conditions against Soviet offensives. Snow-filled forests and subarctic temperatures near -30 Celsius impaired Soviet logistics as supply lines froze and columns stalled. While some Finnish troops suffered frostbite or exposure, their overall weather-induced losses remained moderate thanks to better clothing, fieldcraft, and tactical use of skis. Soviet forces, lacking adequate insulation and shelter, struggled to stay warm, often becoming casualties without encountering serious resistance. Finnish guerrilla tactics, facilitated by pristine snow cover and knowledge of local terrain, allowed swift ambushes on isolated Soviet units. Though fatalities from the cold increased for both sides, the Soviets lost far more, proving again that mastery of harsh climates provided a decisive edge in brutal winter warfare. Battle of the Bulge. From December 1944 into January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge unfolded in the Ardennes, where snowy forests and frigid weather challenged Allied and German troops. Bitter cold caused widespread frostbite, trench foot, and equipment malfunctions. Though massive in scale, winter-induced casualties were fewer than on the Eastern Front, yet still significant. Vehicles struggled over icy roads, while deep drifts concealed mines and limited visibility. Allied units contended with supply shortages and delayed reinforcements as poor weather grounded aircraft. Despite these hardships, American forces held critical crossroads, gradually halting the German advance. Although snow hampered maneuvers and forced troops into poorly insulated foxholes, effective logistics and improved winter gear helped mitigate losses. In the end, Allied determination overcame brutal cold, preserving cohesion and enabling a hard-fought victory amid snowy adversity. Battle of Moscow. From October 1941 through January 1942, the Battle of Moscow pitted German invaders against Soviet defenders amid extraordinary winter conditions. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius, turning oil into sludge, freezing machine parts, and paralyzing transport. While German soldiers lacked proper winter uniforms, Soviet troops were somewhat better equipped, mitigating their cold-related casualties. Still, exposure, frostbite, and respiratory issues plagued both sides, complicating even mundane tasks like digging foxholes. Snowstorms grounded aircraft and blocked roads, disrupting supply lines, ammunition deliveries, and evacuation of wounded. The relentless cold intensified strain on morale, slowing advances and weakening combat effectiveness. Ultimately, the brutal winter helped halt the German drive toward Moscow, shifting momentum and demonstrating that climate could become a formidable ally indeed. Battle of Chosin Reservoir. In November and December 1950, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in North Korea found United Nations forces, mainly U.S. Marines, encircled by Chinese troops amid merciless winter weather. Temperatures often dip below 25 degrees Celsius, rendering weapons unreliable, congealing fuel, and turning basic survival into an ordeal. Frostbite, hypothermia, and frozen rations multiplied non-combat casualties, pushing morale to the brink. Snow-choked mountain roads hindered evacuation of the wounded and complicated resupply efforts, forcing reliance on risky airdrops. Though heavily outnumbered, the Marines fought doggedly, extracting themselves through a fighting withdrawal that tested every sinew of human endurance. The Chosin campaign illustrated how extreme cold magnified every hardship, enlarging casualty lists and demonstrating that nature's fury could rival enemy firepower beyond all expectations. Siege of Leningrad. From September 1941 until January 1944, the Siege of Leningrad exemplified prolonged suffering under relentless winter conditions. Temperatures dropped below minus 30 degrees Celsius, and snowstorms buried streets, crippling movement and access to dwindling supplies. Civilians and soldiers alike faced starvation, as food rations barely sustained life. Heating fuel vanished, leaving families huddled in freezing apartments, while frostbite and respiratory diseases soared. Though sporadic fighting continued, the ferocious climate often halted offensives. Thousands perished daily. The besieged city's defenders endured these horrors, struggling to maintain morale and prevent total collapse. While shelling inflicted terrible losses, the punishing cold exacerbated death tolls beyond the enemy's artillery. Ultimately, over 1 million lives were lost, proving that winter's cruelty, combined with siege warfare, could produce unimaginable human tragedy without remorse. Battle of Sarikamish. Between December 1914 and January 1915, the Battle of Sarikamish raged in the icy Caucasus Mountains, where Ottoman forces confronted Russian defenders amid unforgiving winters. Temperatures hovered near minus 20 degrees Celsius, and deep snow ensnared entire columns. Inadequately clothed, Ottoman troops succumbed to frostbite, hypothermia, and exhaustion long before meeting entrenched Russians. Supplies froze, rifles jammed, and mules perished under relentless blizzards. Russian units, though also afflicted, were somewhat better prepared, suffering fewer weather-induced fatalities. Conditions were so dire that more Ottomans died from the elements than from enemy bullets. This disastrous campaign demonstrated how ill-equipped armies risked annihilation when nature turned hostile. The extreme cold magnified every weakness, tearing apart morale and discipline. Ultimately, the battle showed that frigid weather could claim more lives than any rifle volley. Battle of Stalingrad. From August 1942 to February 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad devoured armies in a frozen inferno on the Eastern Front. Temperatures fell below minus 30 degrees Celsius, bringing horrifying conditions that intensified an already brutal urban conflict. German forces, trapped inside encirclements, lacked insulated clothing, adequate rations, or medical supplies. Frostbite, hunger, and rampant disease ravaged their ranks before Soviet assaults even arrived. Snowdrifts concealed bodies and immobilized machinery, while blizzards disrupted logistics and grounded aircraft. Though the Soviets also suffered terribly, their familiarity with severe winters mitigated certain losses. Ultimately, weather amplified casualties to staggering proportions, contributing to over 2 million dead, wounded, or captured. The freezing horrors blended with street-to-street combat, making survival almost impossible. Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. In late 1812, Napoleon's Grand Army began retreating from a burned and empty Moscow, facing an unforgiving Russian winter. Over 600,000 soldiers had entered Russia. Fewer than 50,000 would return. Temperatures plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius, freezing men, horses, and wagons in place. Starvation and frostbite claimed more lives than enemy attacks, as stragglers collapsed on icy roads. Snow-concealed landmarks, hindering navigation, while howling winds scattered desperately needed supplies. Russian Cossacks harassed the remnants, requiring no grand battles to destroy Napoleon's might. Survivors trudged westward in ragged columns, their morale shattered and discipline vanished. This calamity proved climate could shatter empires, undoing careful strategy with merciless efficiency. The catastrophic weather conditions transformed retreat into apocalypse, ensuring that winter would forever be remembered as the greatest conqueror of Napoleon's ambition and legacy. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons below.